I don't know, some of my favorite songs have been duets, and some not so great ones have been duets as well. Welcome to Get to the Hook. I am your co-host, Charles Latibeaudiere.
I am your other co-host, Eric Colley.
And together we are going to get you to the hook. And this week, the hook is all about duets, superstar duets, which, I don't know, some of my favorite songs have been duets, and some not so great ones have been duets as well. But generally, I think it's a good idea, right?
It becomes an event record when you get two big stars who come together. Sometimes some of the ones we're going to look at today are some of the biggest hits of all time. Some were surprising flops.
Because they were incredible. When you bring together two huge names, you think it's always going to work. And sometimes it doesn't.
It almost works better when it's two people you don't expect. When it's somebody, when it seems like inevitable, these two are going to make a record. They have to. The hype almost crushes whatever the song itself is.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about this because there's a new one out right now. It is doing huge numbers this week, probably going to be number one. And again, it's not totally unexpected, but it's not two people you would immediately think they go together. This is Post Malone and Morgan Wallen. I Had Some Help.
I had some help. It ain't like I can make this kind of mess all by myself. Don't act like you ain't help me pull that bottle off the shelf. Be deep in every weekend.
That's a catchy song.
I can't tell you what I would have expected a Post Malone and Morgan Wallen song to sound like, but that's not it. That sounds like a Jonas Brothers song.
It's very poppy, very up-tempo.
Really poppy and up-tempo, which is not what I would have expected.
But they both dabble in pop. Like Morgan Wallen's country, but he knows his way around a hook.
They both dabble in pop, and I think Post maybe even more, although that's, I guess, some of the knock on Morgan Wallen, that his country is too close to pop hip-hop.
But like some of Post's biggest hits are Circles and Sunflowers.
Yes,
very
so
pop
Post, I
songs.
expect, but even those were like sort of moody pop. This is like...
This is Song of the Summer is what it's going.
That's kind of what it has that vibe, that it wants to be like Song of the Summer. Wow.
And also, we should say right now, Beyonce and Miley Cyrus have a song out, Two Most Wanted. People gravitated to that song on Cowboy Carter because they wanted to hear what those two voices sound like. Because it's not the most unlikely pairing, but you wouldn't automatically just think, oh yeah, Beyonce and Miley.
Yeah.
You wouldn't put them together like that.
It's actually one of my favorite songs on the
That's
album.
a great song. It's a beautiful song.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say up front, because people always look at the comments sometimes. You should never look at the comments, but sometimes I do. And people be like, oh, you didn't mention that. You forgot this. We can't mention all.
We're not going to get all
This
of
would be a 10-hour podcast. So no Usher and Alicia Keys, Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder.
Right. Doesn't mean that they weren't great songs. We're just
picking some to
and we kind of picked ones where there's a decent story, around it.
Because some came from very weird origins, these songs. Some transformed artists' careers. Some changed their life in personal ways. The first one I would talk about is just a really odd story how this came about. 1978, Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond, You Don't Bring Me Flowers.
You don't bring me flowers anymore.
You secretly love that song. I know you do.
No, I'm laughing because I was trying to think how I want to say this. If you are of a certain age and you have a significant other, at some point you jokingly sing that song or even just say a line or two from the song to your significant other.
Right.
Jokingly.
Well, that's sort of why that song exists. Do you know how that duet happened?
I have heard this story, and I think the first time I heard it, I was like blown away that they didn't actually plan to do it as a duet. They each
Not at all.
recorded it. They each recorded the song solo.
Right. So Neil co-wrote the song. It was on his album. Barbra Streisand did a cover of it on her album the same year. And a DJ from Kentucky named Gary Guthrie. And talk about joking with significant others. It was not a joke for him. He and his wife were getting divorced. And as sort of a lovely parting gift, he noticed that Neil and Barbara's solo versions were in the same key. So he spliced them together and made his own edit and made it a duet, which also, to his credit, this is before digital. He was slicing tape and making this. But because he was a DJ, he started playing it on air. And people loved it. The audience started calling in, going, we got to have this. Other stations made their own versions of it, multiple homemade edits of this. And Columbia Records was like, we are losing tons of money. We got to get these two.
Get them in the booth.
Right.
let's record this. And they say nothing good comes out of divorce. You see that? You see, we got a classic song because Gary Guthrie and his wife got divorced.
Yep, and she liked Neil and Barbara.
Shout out to the ex-Mrs. Guthrie.
Right. And I would say this was kind of, in hindsight, maybe transformative for Barbra Streisand, because I was thinking about it, her career going forward, the year after that, she and Donna Summer did the song No More Tears, Enough Is Enough.
And then she got with Barry Gibb.
Then she and Barry Gibb. Then she did songs.
That really was kind of like...
Duets were her thing. Kim Carnes, Don Johnson, Celine Dion, Bryan Adams.
Yeah.
Into the late 90s, she was doing this.
Yeah. Well, she has that voice that everybody wants to. You want to be next to that voice
Right.
on a song.
If you can hold your own against Barbra Streisand.
And also, in some cases, you don't have to be that great of a voice because she's going to carry it, Don Johnson.
He did all right.
Yes, he did all right. Yeah.
One of the biggest hits of all time, it was number one for 9 weeks in 1981, was one of those all-star, superstar duets. And this one makes a bit more sense because it was Motown royalty, but it was sort of kind of the soft landing of one career and the launch of another.
Ooh,
Diana Ross,
well described.
Lionel Richie, Endless Love.
And I'll give it all to you, my love, my endless love.
Is it just me, or I really feel like we're just telling on ourselves about like some of these songs? Like, if you don't know, like Eric and I are very close in age, and therefore,
I mean, there's a little bit of a gap. You're a little bit older.
Okay, a little bit.
Let me take what I can get.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that song was. I think that's like the first song I remember being like it was number one for a long time.
9 weeks, which at the time, I mean, it's still very impressive, but it was
Yeah.
rare back then. And this is, I think you could call these not just superstar duets, event songs. That song was an event.
Yeah.
Diana Ross, it was a superstar among superstars. Although, oddly, that was her last number one hit. Lionel Richie, who had just been coming off of a huge career with the Commodores, was trying to launch his solo career, and his first solo hit is that.
Pretty good. It's a pretty good
Yeah.
start.
So it was sort of a little bit of an, I don't want to say an
know.
ending to Diana Ross's career.
Yeah.
She's still Diana Ross,
She's Diana, right?
but she never
She's
got back
always
to the
just
top
Diana Ross.
again.
Yeah. Well,
And Lionel hit
by the
many
way,
times.
that's a strong finish. If you're Diana Ross and you go like, that's the last.
The biggest hit of her career.
There you go.
I mean, that's not too bad.
Leave them wanting more.
And that song itself had another go around as a superstar duet in 1994.
Luther Vandross.
Luther Vandross, Mariah Carey.
Right. That's right.
And it got to number 2. It didn't quite get to number 1 for them because of Boyz II Men. And we will get into Mariah and Boyz II Men in a little bit here.
Yes.
First, we're talking about, with Barbra Streisand, how it was sort of a badge of honor if you could sing with her. This next song, kind of like with Diana and Lionel, it was the last number 1 hit for a legend and the first solo number 1 hit for someone who would become a legend. And this was legitimacy for him. This was Aretha Franklin, George Michael. I love this song. I Knew You Were Waiting for Me. God, that song is so good.
Just a recommendation. It's a great road trip song.
Oh,
It's
yeah?
great. It just plays well on the road.
You just sing at the top of your lungs,
at
the windows
high
down.
speed. Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
you got
I
to.
don't know about that.
So are you singing Aretha's parts or George's parts?
I think I tend to sing Aretha's
You have
parts.
to. It's a little bit showier.
Yeah, it's
She's
a little
doing the
showier,
soaring
yeah.
and stuff, running the notes. I am not going to try it right now.
The problem is I can never get anybody to sing the Aretha part. I always start out going, look, I'll sing George Michael, you sing the Aretha, and
And then you're like, you'd be quiet.
never mind.
I'm Aretha. I'm Aretha in that car.
I'll take both parts. That's I mean,
Because you got to remember George Michael at that point, coming off of Wham, and it sounds weird now because I think he is respected. Just got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally. But I think he was very much afraid of being the wake me up before you go guy.
right.
I mean, Careless Whisper was a bit more serious, but still, Wham was kind of bubblegum poppy, and he wanted to be a much more serious, respected artist. And when you go solo, if you can hold your own against Aretha Franklin,
Right.
then
You have
not even making a pun, but that is respect.
right. You have your cred there, and you can say yes. I'm ready to go on my solo career. I didn't realize that was his first solo because
Well, if you count
The
Careless
last-
Whisper because he was featured on it, but
right, even though that was
it was
a
Wham featuring
song,
George
it was
Michael.
really just
Yeah.
George Michael.
But yeah, but, and also to George's credit, when Faith came out, like that was his first solo album, he did not put "I Knew You Were Waiting for Me" on that record
Yeah, I always wondered that.
because it wasn't it was a one-off single for him. It wasn't the artistic vision that fit with that album, and I respect that. Like, it would have been so easy and tempting to say, I've already got this number one hit. Let me just tack it onto the record, but he didn't.
Yeah, but when I bought the record, I was
You wanted-
expecting. Yeah, I was like, wait a second, where's I knew you were waiting for me? It's not on the record.
Yeah, he did not put that on there. I don't know why. I certainly don't think he was ashamed of it.
I take issue.
Yeah.
Take issue with that decision.
Also,
but
we'll say later, a lot of people in the 80s, Elton John did a duet with Aretha Franklin. Eurythmics did a duet with Aretha Franklin. Another big artist did one with her that flopped. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. First, while we're looking at the ones that hit, that were successful,
yes,
let's jump to the 90s. This one I
Oh, yeah.
love because it was a fake feud that became a real feud because of the song. So 94, 95, Brandy and Monica both come out barely in their teens, very young singers. Debut albums, very successful, lots of top 10 hits for both of them. And for some reason, people just pitted them against each other. And I've seen them say, they're like, Aaliyah came out at the same time. She was the same age as us, but nobody ever put us against Aaliyah. It was never Brandy versus Aaliyah or Monica
Huh.
versus Aaliyah. It was Brandy
Yeah.
and Monica. People created this feud between them that didn't really exist. So they decided to just tap into that going into their second albums. They teamed up on a song. This is a classic banger, The Boy Is Mine.
It's not hard to say, boy is mine. Oh, no. You need to give it up.
So this turned into an actual feud.
A real feud. So the song becomes a huge hit. It was number one for 13 weeks, dominated the summer of 1998. And so, yeah, they went into it just like people think we hate each other. So the song is the two of them fighting over a guy, and the video had them kind of playfully going back and forth. And then it started to turn into a real feud. So when their second albums came out right after that, of course, both of them put the song on their albums. Brandy's album is called Never Say Never. And it was Brandy's song originally. Brandy invited Monica to be
Oh, really?
part of
Okay.
it. And Monica called her album The Boy Is Mine.
Oh no!
And so then it starts.
See, now you've gone too far.
Yep. So Brandy in concert started singing The Song Is Mine. And
Oh man!
to date, they only ever performed the song together once at the 1998 MTV Video Music Awards. And things got so heated between them that Monica punched Brandy in the face. She took a swing at her.
Why do I not remember this?
Oh, it was a thing. And even all these years later, like, they're
Where did
adults
she-
at this
where
point.
Where did she take a swing at her?
Backstage at the
Oh,
VMAs.
after the
So
after
before,
the-
like during the rehearsals, I think it was, I don't know exactly what the circumstances
Right.
are. I imagine
but during
like,
a rehearsal.
bring my mic up, a little that diva-ish
Right.
behavior. And when they did Versus a couple years ago during quarantine, well, for one, when they did the song, Monica didn't sing it. Only Brandy sang it. So they still, that VMAs is the only time they've ever performed it live together. And Brandy kind of made a reference to, because Monica's talking about like how, they both had gone through so much in their lives, and Monica was like, I used to be like a, kick in tables and,
Right.
kind of scrappy person. And Brandy's like, oh, I know. Like she made reference to it. Like, you punched me in the face. And so they got along at that Versus, but you could tell there's a little bit of tension.
and it all has to go back to just Monica stealing the title for her album.
I would think that's
mean,
got to be a big part of it. Like,
because they knew that they were going to do the song together. They were, and the song is great. Obviously, they both should have been happy because it went to number one, and yet that's got to be it. By the way, there's a thing where why their labels both said this would be great if you guys did it, and they probably talked them into it, and then it turned into disaster for them.
but also that's the defining song of both of their careers. I think if you think of either, that's the weird thing is they are for eternity tied together now.
Right.
Like if you say Brandy, Monica's the next thing you think of because of that song, because of, and it's funny because other than just being like teen R&B singers at the time, they don't have a whole lot in common.
Yeah, what did they? I mean, was that just why pit them against each other?
Well, I don't know. Why do we do it here all the time? We do.
That's good. It's fun. That's
We
why.
do.
Because it's fun.
Actually for 20 years, this was the longest running number one hit of all
Yeah.
time. Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men. And it's funny because it's the biggest hit technically either of them had chart wise.
Mhm.
Although All I Want for Christmas Is You is probably going to pass it in the next year or two. But I don't think it's the most memorable. Like if you think of Mariah Carey's hits or Boyz II Men's hits, you will never think of this One Sweet Day.
It's also
it's
just a
nice.
really, it's nice. It's such a sad song. Like I always think of, there artists will set out to write a song that they know will become an anthem that's played at weddings or that's played at a sporting event or something. I mean, that one's for like funerals.
Right. Well, the story
And-
they've told is that Mariah met with Boyz II Men in the studio, and we were talking about like Brandy and Monica, how the public sort of willed those two to make a song together. It was inevitable that Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men would do a song together. In the mid-'90s, they were the two
Right.
pop chart juggernauts at the time. You know, every number one hit was breaking records. So if you put the two together, there's no way that could fail. And it wound up spending 16 weeks at number one. But when they met, Mariah said that she had been working on a song about missing someone who had died. Boyz II Men were also working on a song and they had similar lyrics. And they're like, well, what if we just put these together? And that became One Sweet Day.
That's even rarer that they took two different songs
Yeah.
and brought them together and actually
And
had
it worked. It
incredible
clicked. But again, I don't think it's even the most memorable song from Mariah's album because that also had Fantasy and Always Be My Baby on it. I think
Right.
those are much better remembered songs at this point. But in that moment, those two acts coming together, there's no way that could have failed.
What's the other? By the way, there's another Boyz II Men song. I can't remember the title now. That was also number
Oh,
one for a long
Multiple. End of the Road was number one
End
for
of the
13
Road.
weeks.
And that's I always saw End of the Road as kind of similar themed to that one.
And I
but-
think they probably had that in mind when they made
right.
that. Because their other song was I'll Make Love to You was 14 weeks at number one. Boyz II Men had a lot of big hits.
Wow.
People sleep on them now,
Yeah.
but they were so big. So that seems like, yeah, there's no way this song could not be a hit. But sometimes you think a song can't be a hit, it can't miss,
Can't miss.
and it does miss. And going back to Aretha Franklin,
And this is one that was definitely anticipated because
Yes.
Whitney Houston's origin story was always about her mother's connections with Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin was her
and Dionne Warwick. Yeah, Aretha
Yeah.
Franklin in the How Will I Know video, Whitney had a little video of Aretha's face pop up at one
Yes.
point where she says, I'm asking you because you know about these things. So Aretha and Whitney were very close. And Whitney, not that their voices are similar necessarily, but Whitney was the powerhouse vocalist of the 80s.
right.
Aretha had been through the 60s and 70s and still into the 80s, like with George
Yeah.
Michael. So Aretha's like, oh, George and I got a number one hit. If Whitney and I do a song together, it's a guaranteed number one song.
I would bet on it.
And to quote the name of the song itself in regards to that, it isn't, it wasn't, it ain't never gonna be.
It isn't, it wasn't, it ain't never gonna be. It isn't, it wasn't, it ain't never gonna be.
It stalled at number 41. It fell just short. It didn't even
41.
make the top 40.
Here's the thing. It's not a great song.
It's not.
like it was just that's poor
It's
production on
it's,
someone's
it's
part.
like
Like the
watered down New Jack Swing.
right. Like that wasn't gonna work for those two artists. And it doesn't
It's not the wheelhouse of either one of them. I think had they done a big sweeping ballad, it would have worked better.
Yes.
Like with Mariah and Boyz II Men, if you listen to the end of One Sweet Day, I always used to laugh at this. I still do. When they're doing runs over top of each other,
Right.
it's like who can out-sing who? Or like when Barbra Streisand and Donna Summer did their song.
Yes.
The story was they were nose to nose in the studio trying to out-diva each other and hit notes and go higher.
That's what you needed that moment for
Yeah.
for Whitney and Aretha. That had to happen, and that song is not gonna. Wow, that is a major mistake.
It's-
Well, I will say this: the fact that it only got to 41 is weird, because even though it's not a great song, you would think just the curiosity, the anticipation, and just having those two names on it, that at least gets it in the top 40.
Top 10, you'd think. I mean, Whitney was
Yeah.
on a streak of just number one after number one after number one. She had 7 number ones in a row in the late 80s. Everything was going top 10. And then you think, oh, Whitney and Aretha, this is going to be.
So to not make it is an absolute rejection of the song. Although,
Yes.
as we know on the charts, a lot of it has to do with what else is out at that time, and I can't remember.
I don't
what-
think that song ever would have been a huge hit. And oddly, because Whitney Houston, you think, being such a superstar and having such a great voice, like we were saying with Barbra Streisand, you would want to sing with Whitney Houston just to show you could do it. Every time she did a big event single duet, it kind of tanked. The one that people in the 90s had talked about for years was Whitney and Mariah.
Right.
Those two, the two vocalists of the 90s. Let's get them on a song. It finally happened, and it was
Was the
When You
the
Believe
movie?
from Prince of Egypt.
Yeah.
It did win an Oscar, I'll give it that, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Right.
But it peaked at number 15. And you would think a Whitney Houston-Mariah Carey duet, that they had been,
It was an
Teasing.
okay song.
it was okay,
It was okay,
but it's not what anybody wanted.
and it was the ballad, and it did showcase both of them. But
I'm still, 25 years later, I don't know why that song bombed. I mean, I wouldn't say it bombed, but it was definitely not as big as people thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Whitney also did a song with Enrique Iglesias, Can I Have This Kiss Forever, missed the top 50. Her song with Bobby Brown, Something in Common, wasn't that big of a hit.
That wasn't a big hit.
It got some radio airplay.
I play that one still.
Oh, well, I mean, it's not a bad song, but just you'd think, given like all the drama around them dating
Right.
and marrying, and he was still a huge star at that time. She was, the Bodyguard was happening. You'd think, oh, this is going to be
Yeah.
one of the biggest songs ever. And it wasn't. It wasn't even like one of the top 5 Whitney Houston songs of 1993.
Sometimes the public gets it wrong. That was a good song.
I do like Something in Common. That's a great song. Another one that, going a little bit later, that this just seemed like, oh, this is going to be an event. Britney Spears and Madonna. This is the
Oh.
queens of pop of 2 different generations coming together on a song. They had just made out at the VMAs, and they
What
were.
more do they have to do
Yeah.
to sell the song?
So this is a
people?
guaranteed hit until it wasn't. Me Against the Music. Number 35. That's as high as it got.
It's got a decent beat.
It's catchy, but then the follow-up
just-
single was Toxic, which was, of course, a giant classic hit.
Right.
You'd think Britney and Madonna doing a song would have been just as big or bigger. And people were like, nah, not feeling it.
Huh.
They just weren't into it.
Just for curiosity's sake.
Yeah.
Madonna also did a song with Justin Timberlake.
Yeah, 4 minutes. That was more of a hit. For,
How did that do?
number 3 or 4? 4, I think. Or no,
There you
3,
go.
because it was 4 minutes. Yeah, so
Sorry,
that got
Britney
top
fans.
5.
Britney fans don't want to hear that.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
But also 4 minutes was kind of a better song.
Yeah.
Than Me Against the Music.
I agree.
But, they both wound up having hits after that. Britney was...
Well, everyone was fine. Everyone was fine.
This next one, I don't want to say this was a flop, but I will say I think
Cannot say it is a flop.
it was not a
Eric.
flop.
I'm
It was
not
not a
going to let
flop.
you say
I'm not
it's a flop.
saying it. You
And
don't have to let me
you know
not
what?
say it.
Here's one. I want to tell you. I don't care what the charts say. I don't care. You can take your charts, rip them up.
This is not even about charts. But this song, there was so much hype for this for years before it even happened, and then it had the most
years.
expensive video in history.
A great video.
This should have been one of the biggest songs of all time.
You done messed up, America. You messed up.
Michael and Janet, Scream.
We're such delusions, don't it make you wanna scream? You best your music, fix the pop in the scheme.
I'm not saying it flopped. Got to number 5. But you would just think Michael and Janet, people had been wanting them from the time
That
that
is-
she became a superstar herself. You wanted to hear them together. And I like the song, the glass breaking sound effect. Jam and Lewis produced
It's
it.
phenomenal.
The video had so much hype. And then within like a week of it coming out, no one cared anymore.
I don't know why.
I don't either.
I watched the video over and over. The video is amazing. The song is great.
Everything for that to be a
and
hit
it sounds
is there.
ridiculous to say that it like you said,
No, it was a
didn't
hit. It
flop.
was a
It was a hit. It was a big hit. It would go to number 5 is huge. What was number 1? I'd have to know what kept it.
That might have been Gangsta's Paradise. I'm trying to think. Summer Night.
That was around that.
But then
time.
Michael then got to number 1 with the next single, You Are Not Alone. Janet released Runaway from her Greatest Hits album a couple months after that. That got to number 3 and had a much longer run on the charts. So it wasn't like either one of them couldn't still get a hit. But and that's one I think maybe people felt disappointed in the moment just because there had been so much anticipation from
Right.
Michael and Janet to do a song. And kind of whatever they did was going to not
Was
live up
not
to that
gonna be
hype.
Good enough.
Justice for Scream, I think.
I can't use the words I was going to use, but
What?
you done blanked up, right?
right.
You done blanked up.
This next song I want to talk about, not a classic song for either of these artists. This was 2 A-list superstars who've always been friends. But this is a weird historical curiosity now. Remember Stuck With You by Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber?
Yeah, well, it's how we all felt at the time.
It was the COVID lockdown song. I think it's not a bad song, but this was Stuck With You.
Baby, run your mouth. I still wouldn't trade being stuck with you, stuck with you, stuck with you. I'm stuck with you, stuck with you, stuck with you.
It's a time capsule.
It is.
It's a little bit of a time capsule.
Everybody was stuck at home. It's hard for artists to record new music, certainly to do a duet. That's
Right.
maybe the appeal of that was. One, because they are both huge A-list stars. But the idea of people coming together again in 2020 was
Right.
a big deal. And it was a charity song. The proceeds from that went to a charity for the children of first responders, which was a nice thing to do.
Yep.
And they had a video. I don't know if you remember. They had fans send in clips. So for all the kids that year who couldn't go to prom, they
Right.
sent in their videos and stuff. It was sort of a come together moment for people. And I don't think they've both had so many hits. And even though that did debut at number 1, it dropped off very quickly.
Yeah.
Nobody really remembers it so much now.
It-
But it is a weird curiosity of a weird moment in time.
yeah. And like you said, I think at that moment, it was just something that everyone appreciated, needed, and then it was over.
Yeah. Although there
Moved
was
on.
one lasting little thing because Ariana Grande is brilliant about keeping people invested in her personal life. So it was, I don't know if you remember the video, it was home video of like Justin and Haley together at their house and
Right.
different people, and Ariana is trapped at her house alone until the end of the video where she reveals
When
she was not alone in her house.
exactly.
She was in
with,
lockdown with
Dalton.
Dalton Gomez
Yeah, and then they got married, and
And then they got
lived happily
divorced.
ever
Yeah, no.
after.
until SpongeBob showed up.
Oh,
And,
God, it's always SpongeBob. Yeah, that didn't work out, but it was a nice sentiment.
It
a
was
very
nice.
sentiment. Yeah.
Relationship drama, though. So I think that partly spurred interest in that song was when people realized there's a guy with her at the end of the video. These next 2 songs I'm going to talk about, relationship drama made these much bigger events than they might have been otherwise. Going back to 97. So married couples have done songs together for a long time. Beyonce and Jay-Z have done a lot of songs together. Carly Simon and James Taylor back in the day.
Sonny and Cher.
Sonny and Cher, Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood, Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani. There's a lot. But one of the most dramatic, and this is when I worked in country radio, so I remember this. 1997, Tim McGraw, Faith Hill, It's Your Love.
It's your love. It just does something to me. It sends a shock right through me. I can't get enough.
Now, I don't know how much you remember about the backstory on that.
I don't remember much at all.
At
and
this
actually-
point, we know Tim McGraw and Faith Hill have been married for almost 30 years. They have kids. They've been a very successful marriage. 1996, they are both big stars at that point, very big stars. They're on tour together. I think she was opening for him. She was coming off of a divorce, was engaged to another guy. He had a girlfriend. They go on tour together. Suddenly, she's not engaged anymore. He's not dating his girlfriend
not with his
anymore.
girlfriend anymore.
I remember there were stories that people saw them kissing behind the tour buses.
Well,
So what had happened was, June of 96, he proposes to her. They've been dating for maybe a few months, if
Right.
that, while on tour. They get married in October. So I got to get the timeline here.
Wow.
He proposes in June. They get married in October of 96. May of 97, she gives birth to their first child, which is slightly less than 9 months after October of 1996.
yeah.
So
uh-huh.
somewhere between the engagement and the marriage, she gets pregnant, especially in country.
Right.
This was such hot gossip. This was a scandal.
So I need to hear more about when you worked in country music.
I worked at country radio for 3 years
Really?
Yeah.
What? Where? What market?
at Kicks Country, 106.3, 107.7, the best and most country
Where is that?
in West Virginia.
In West Virginia. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and people were so into the drama of Tim McGraw and Faith Hill. Are they dating? Are they not? Because they were kind of coy about it at first, probably because she was engaged. And she eventually admitted later, she's like, you can think I'm a slut or a bad person or whatever, but she's like, what was I going to do? Let Tim McGraw slip through my fingers? And clearly, in hindsight,
her.
it
And it
worked
worked
out.
out.
They've been
Yes.
together for a very long time. But in the midst of all this hype and curiosity, they come out with that song, which came out the same month their daughter was born.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a great song. 6 weeks at number 1 on the country chart. It was the longest running number 1 in 20 years there. Top 10 on the pop chart. And was the beginning of many duets for them.
Yeah.
Long career, happy together, and people still have interest
So
in Tim and Faith.
that's one a duet that worked out, but nobody saw coming.
Right. A little bit more recent, a little bit younger. Late 2010s, and you remember we covered this at TMZ so much.
Yeah.
When Shawn Mendes and Camila Cabello, who had already done a duet a couple years before, they had known each other for years. But 2019, are they dating? Are they not dating? They released this song, Senorita.
I love it when you call me señorita. I wish I could pretend I didn't need ya, but every touch is ooh la la.
It's his only number 1 to date.
Really?
Her second. She hasn't been back since because there was so much speculation about whether they were together or not. They were very kind of
Yeah.
coy about it, but also sort of obvious, but we didn't know. The song comes out in May. He confirms in September they're dating. The beginning of September, the song goes to number 1. That's like the fever pitch of
Right.
Sean and Camilla mania, I suppose. Then they broke up in 2021, and it wasn't dramatic. We know
Yeah.
last year at Coachella, they hooked up again.
Hooked up
They're
again.
still
and
friends.
then they say they're still friends.
There was no big drama, and people lost interest.
But it did feel like And see, and to this day, we always talk about this here. We still go like, were they really a couple? Like,
We doubted it for so long. It's like, are they? They are. Are
when
they?
they broke up, we're like, oh, they're not really a couple. But then when they hooked up again at Coachella, we're like, oh, well, then they must have actually been a couple before. But I think it's because the song, when you have a song that you do together that comes out at the same time, it makes people think that you're just doing it for marketing.
It felt like
purposes.
marketing because it drummed. I mean, they both were very, they'd had hits and were successful. But once people got invested in their personal lives, it became a much bigger thing.
Right.
And like I said, it was his only #1 song. And, yeah, maybe they took advantage of that.
But sometimes it is real, and it's not just marketing. Like, we said the same thing when Gwen Stefani and Blake Shelton got together. Like, oh, of course. Well, they're both judges on The Voice. It'll be great for ratings. But,
Now
they actually went
they've been married for a while. And
carried through and got married. We're like, all right, I
Yeah.
guess we were wrong about that.
were we? It's been a really long con,
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
know.
Hey, sometimes you got to do the long play. But listen, we get good music, regardless of whether it's for marketing or it's real and they come together. As long as we get good music, that's the bottom line.
Right. Sometimes it's very inspired. Sometimes it's just to have a hit. But you know what? If it's a catchy song, I can forgive that.
By hook or by crook. If
Yeah.
you get a good song, that's what we're all about. Getting
Right,
to the hook.
getting to the
That's going to do it for this week. We will see you next week.